Initializing Enduring Play Podcast Season 1 engine. Decompressing audio. Synchronizing waveforms. Reticulating splines. Launching Podcast Lobby.
Welcome back to Enduring Play, the podcast where we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive. I'm your host, Cheryl Platts, video game designer, director, and author of the Game Development Strategy Guide from Rosenfeld Media. In this first season of the Enduring Play podcast, we focus on going deep with some of the folks who were interviewed for my book and get the full story. In today's episode, we hear from narrative director, writer, and former studio head Whitney Beltrán as we explore the nuances and craft of narrative design. We'll talk about the difference between writing and narrative design, implementing narrative design in today's game engines, the concept of ludonarrative harmony and dissonance, the role of tools and training in narrative design careers, how leadership manifests as a narrative director, and much more. Before we head into today's conversation, a note. Just because a craft seems easy to access, that doesn't mean it's easy to master. Video game career community leader Amir Satvad posted on LinkedIn in July 2025 based on 3 years of observation during difficult times in the games industry, and claimed that writing and narrative jobs were 22 times more competitive than baseline roles in engineering, programming, and tech design. In my book, we talk about the motivators of play and engaging players over time, and narrative design sits squarely at the intersection of the motivator of play, of immersion, and the need to keep players engaged over time. It's a critical craft that is underappreciated. I hope we will see more narrative-driven game design as the game industry starts to heal. For now, it's rough out there for narrative designers. You may find yourself having to self-create your own work just to fill out your portfolio. One last point, if you're new to writing for video games, remember that video game writing is inherently non-linear, and that's why we need so many tools. The interactivity of video games means a wide world of possibility, and yet one tool survives the test of time.
If you want to do narrative, be prepared to have spreadsheets be your life.
Let's get into the game.
Player 1, Cheryl Platts. Player 2, Whitney Beltrán. Podcast level, start.
Welcome back to Enduring Play, where we discuss what it takes to create video games that don't just survive but thrive. And Whitney Beltrán, our guest today, has certainly been thriving throughout her career. Not just creating video games, but games across many media. Traditional tabletop role-playing games. She was in the Game Awards Future Class in 2020. She plays Games Top 100 Women in the Games Industry in 2022. Her game Hollow Vista won a wide variety of awards. But what's most important is how a person defines themselves. And for that, I will turn it over to Whitney herself. Whitney, welcome to Enduring Play, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Cheryl. It's good to see you again, and thanks for having me on.
Can you get our audience started by giving them your elevator pitch for how you define yourself and your role in the industry today?
Sure. Hi. So I'm Whitney Beltrán. I am a narrative designer and writer for games. My full-time career is in video games, but I also have designed tabletop role-playing games, including Bluebeard's Bride, with my co-authors Sarah Richardson and Marissa Kelly. I've worked on Dungeons and Dragons books. I've done AR, VR, and I actually just recently finished up a run with an immersive theater doing design for them. So that was super cool.
I love how your storytelling knows no bounds. If you can tell a story there, I feel like you've told a story there.
Podcast level 1, exploring narrative design.
When we talk about your role as a narrative designer in video games, I think for some people that's probably a little mysterious. How would you describe that role to someone who is, say, in engineering or in art?
Yeah, so the first thing to know about narrative design in video games is the definition of what you do is different from studio to studio. So a narrative designer at one studio may actually be a games writer. Like they write dialogue and they write plot and they develop characters and they do that specific thing. At another studio, narrative designer may mean technical narrative designer, which is someone who's scripting in blueprints in Unreal in creating narrative systems and, doing implementation and not doing any writing at all, actually, but just systems work. For me, what I do is somewhere in between those things. So I am a systems thinker where I think about narrative in a very modular, archetypal way, which lends itself really well to video games. And so I work on, well, how do we deliver dialogue? How does our branching work? How are we integrating VO? But also developing story, characters, writing cutscenes, writing dialogue. One of my real strengths is ensemble casts. So I mostly work on narrative forward or role-playing games, and that's because I write really cool characters who do really amazing things. That's my superpower. So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I sit somewhere in the middle of that cloud.
That's it. What a great superpower if you have to choose a superpower. And for folks who might be on the beginner side of things, VO refers to voiceover, I believe, in this context.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
Narrative design isn't just about writing, as you just heard from Whitney. In fact, sometimes writing is an entirely separate role. But to get the most out of today's conversation, one piece of context you need is video game engines, which we also discuss in Chapter 12 in the Game Development Strategy Guide. Unreal, Unity, and Godot are all examples of commercially available, off-the-shelf video game engines, software platforms that are like toolkits game developers use to build their interactive worlds. Each one has its own strengths, weaknesses, and plugins. These are different from bespoke engines where a studio creates its own physics systems, file systems, graphic systems, networking, and social systems, and more from scratch. As we get further into the conversation and discuss the concept of scripting, or implementing specific dialogues and scenes in game, you'll hear two key terms: blueprints and JSON. Blueprints is short for the Blueprints Visual Scripting Engine, which allows narrative designers and game designers to visually depict a player's movement through time in a game, connecting various states together with logic and game assets. JSON is short for JavaScript Object Notation. Like HTML, it's a file format that doubles as markup language, largely intended for formatting content to be parsed by a variety of digital systems.
Loading. Level 2. Self-driven narrative training.
So you just mentioned a number of tools that you use to implement your narrative designs in video games, like blueprints. When you started your narrative design journey, were you trained on those tools, or did you learn that stuff on the go or on the job? How did you pick that up?
I was absolutely not trained on those tools at all. I came from the analog game design space, specifically tabletop role-playing games. So I learned kind of the concrete how-do of narrative design before I learned the technical what-do. And I actually think that was to my advantage, because designing an elegant blueprint solution is not the same as designing an elegant narrative solution. You want to do both, right? But sometimes you can kind of confuse what your priorities are in terms of delivering narrative effectively. And I'm really glad that I did not learn scripting first, honestly. Was it a pain to learn on my own with YouTube videos afterwards? Yes. But that's the way that games education works, right? Like, nobody needs to go to school for a games degree. If you really want to learn it, you can learn it by doing. That's what most of the generations up till now, before we had game degrees, did. And games is such a doing career anyway, that if you're not inherently curious, you better learn, because otherwise you're going to be left behind when the technology changes. And if you're not self-driven to reinvestigate pretty much all the time, you're going to run into problems.
That change is such an important point, because even if you did go and get the training and learn everything perfectly, it feels like the tools are moving away from us every 6 months or 12 months.
Oh yeah, and in 5 years, your technical prowess will be totally outmoded.
Podcast level 3. Custom narrative tools in game design.
And the other thing to remember for narrative in specific is you will almost always be using bespoke internal tools that the engineering team has built for you to input narrative. Sometimes that's really janky spreadsheets with JSON in them. Sometimes it's an entire narrative tool that integrates cinematics and AI movement and, world state triggering. So you can't learn a tool and be like, I know narrative tools. Literally everywhere you go, it will be different and you'll learn the new tool. They're not hard to learn, obviously. So that should actually be a relief because you're not supposed to know the exact thing and the way that it works when you get there because everyone has bespoke tools.
What a really critical insight. So it sounds like embracing ambiguity is something early narrative designers have to do inherently because there's no way to know what you're going to encounter on the other side. Those dreamy, bespoke systems with cinematic triggers and everything, did you find those systems were more associated with what people typically consider AAA studios, or is it kind of random where that shows up?
So I've worked in both indie and AAA, so I know the space pretty well. Indies will often reach for already created narrative tools like Ink or Artisy or other stuff that comes with plugins with the engine. You can put together a cheap, janky bespoke tool, which honestly, that's what you're going to get a lot of the time as a narrative designer. At the big AAAs, it will just be a bigger, jankier bespoke tool. What you have to understand is everybody wants a piece of the budget, and there's only so much budget to go around, and you are not going to get the full fleshed 1,000 hours to build $100,000 to build tool that you want. You're going to get some slimmed down version of that barely works no matter what studio you're at. It's true, Cheryl.
It's so true. And it's funny because as you describe it, I think it's almost more likely you'll get a nice tool at a smaller studio where they only have to pony up for a few licenses of maybe a nicer tool than at a big studio where they're going to have to buy hundreds of licenses and going to have to cut corners and buy maybe a less nice tool or just build something from scratch. Especially with text. Early in my career, when I was working on The Sims 2, we were writing and localizing in spreadsheets. And we're still writing and localizing in spreadsheets.
Yes, we are. That has not changed. If you want to do narrative, be prepared to have spreadsheets be your life.
You ever feel like you have to adapt the way you're storytelling or the content of your storytelling due to tool limitations?
We try to avoid that, but sometimes that is inevitable. For instance, maybe you need your tool to handle narrative branching in a specific way to have it evoke the kind of storytelling that you want it to have, ludonarrative harmony, right, between all of the working parts, but it's just too expensive for the engineering team to do. And so you have to deal with the narrative branching tool that you have, even though it is not actually aligned to your specific needs 100%. You do your best in every case. Like if you're a smart narrative designer, you'll figure something out. But it is the dream to have the perfect tool to deliver the narrative in the way that you envision. But it's never guaranteed.
Loading. Podcast level 4. Ludonarrative harmony and dissonance.
One of the questions I had was how you define quality in narrative design, and you mentioned a term, ludonarrative harmony. And I wonder if you can expand on what that means to you in your work.
So ludonarrative harmony and ludonarrative dissonance, those are two terms that are quite popular among narrative designers. So ludo, play, narrative, story, harmony, gets along. And so what that really means is, every aspect of a game is communicating a value or communicating a tone, communicating meaning. That's everything from swinging your sword, right? Maybe you swing it very gracefully like an elf, or maybe you swing it very, jerkily like a Viking. The animations for that tell a story, set a mood, right? And so when we say ludonarrative harmony, what we mean is the story, and the story is being told throughout all the other parts of the game, whether it's the music or the mechanics, are in alignment thematically. When you do that, my personal belief is you create, a whole that's bigger than its parts. You create something that's memorable, that's meaningful. It's much easier to deliver soul in those kinds of games. I can talk about game soul for a very long time. And that is generally considered a good idea. Ludonarrative dissonance is when those elements don't get along. Now, that does not mean you never want ludonarrative dissonance. It's a tool just like anything else. So maybe you do want the tension between story and mechanics to point something out, or to work in a sense of irony, or to do any number of things that ludonarrative dissonance can accomplish. So it's not like one is good and one is bad. You just need to be aware of, what are you doing? What are your mechanics doing? What are they saying in concert? So that you're in control of that narrative.
That makes total sense. I remember being an improv teacher, when you teach yes and, that folks immediately feel like they have to say yes to everything in a scene, and they go through a phase where they're like, I can't say no to that marriage proposal. I'm like, actually, that rule, like that doesn't mean literally yes. The knowing rule, and sometimes a block can be useful in an improv scene. Like once you know the rules, you know how to break them towards some bigger goal. So that's a really, I love the way you positioned those two things as two tools, one of which aligns, one of which doesn't.
Loading. Podcast level 5. Defining game soul.
You mentioned you could talk about soul for a very long time.
Maybe you could start by defining the concept of game soul for our listeners.
Yeah, so soul obviously is an esoteric term, but we're artists, so we get to do that. And when I personally talk about game soul, I'm talking about when all the designers sit down together to make a game, it's that feeling in their chest. I'm pointing at my chest right now, that they know that the game is hitting or not hitting. It's that feeling of like, we did it. We're communicating the thing. It's our pure vision, right? And no game makes it through production as a pure vision, just to be super clear, that doesn't happen. But there is, if you're lucky and if you work hard and if you're smart, the ability to take that feeling in your chest and protect it and guide it through the entire process of making that game to, quote, keep the soul of the game alive, so that when it is released, players pick it up and they're like, oh, what is this? I feel this. And it's the game soul. Now, on AAA games, that's pretty hard to pull off because there are so many hands, there's so many things that can go wrong. You know, there's so much challenge in alignment because there are hundreds or thousands of people working on the game. It can be done. It's much more probable on smaller games or indie games because it's a smaller team with a singular vision. They have a much shorter path to, producing and releasing the game. Just odds are more in their favor.
Do you have any favorite examples maybe of how game soul manifested in your own work?
I think there's 2 games that I have made that I feel very proud of the fact that the soul has come through. One of them is the Apple mobile game Hollow Vista, which is a near future vaporwave kind of game that I made with a studio Aconite, and I was the narrative lead on it, and it is actually pretty autobiographical. That's the closest I've come to like, this is my real life, and it's a beautiful game and it makes people cry. And then the other one is the one that I already mentioned, Bluebeard's Bride, which is a tabletop horror RPG based on the fairy tale of Bluebeard. So it's a very psychological, very dark, scary game, but it did exactly what we wanted it to do. And yeah, Cheryl's nodding like, yeah. And we're very proud that it continues to resonate today. Like we've keep selling out our runs, and we keep making our runs, and people keep buying the book. So we did something right.
Now, full disclosure, I got the honor of performing in a live play RPG version of Bluebeard's Bride on Hyper RPG many years ago. But independent of that, it's just a really fantastic self-contained RPG that's more relevant than ever. We'll just leave it at that. But also just like the craft also, like it's clear that the illustrations and the way that packaging is handled, but like the choices you force players to make in the context of that game somehow manage to make people from a lot of different perspectives feel things. Like it has a very specific point of view. So that was, Bluebeard's Bride, really a great TTRPG example, tabletop RPG example. So I'm glad that you've had those game soul experiences. Like one that I don't know if they felt like it had soul. I'm pretty sure they did, but like unpacking like leapt out at me when I played it. I did not know what to expect. But that game, like just there are moments in that game where it's kind of like some of the choices in Bluebeard's Bride, like the way the mechanic works, it forces you to confront things. You're like, oh my God, I don't like this for them. I don't like this at all, but in like a really thoughtful way.
Loading. Podcast level 6. Game narrative versus game writing.
That leads to an interesting segue, because unpacking does not involve a lot of what many people would assume is writing. There's not a lot of text on screen. But narrative design does not always rely on writing per se. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, game narrative is not game writing, right? To just be super clear, like narrative is delivered through every element of a game. So like, for instance, when I was narrative director on a big AAA Dungeons and Dragons game a few years ago, I had not just meetings with the narrative team, but the audio team, the combat team, the cinematics team, the engineers, like really anything where anything got communicated to the players. I was the one in charge of building alignment and making sure we all understood each other. And that's very hard work, right? Because the other thing is you can't just prescribe to people what to do. Like I can't go to a combat designer and be like, do this, this, and this. That doesn't work. We're all artists. We all know our own craft best. So what you have to do is be like, here are the themes. Here are 3 of the themes to consider. I trust you as an artist and a designer to deliver to those themes. Do that however you want. And then, of course, they come up with amazing things that you would never think of, but are totally in alignment. And they get to be artists who have agency, which is super important to running a studio well. It's making sure everyone has appropriate amount of agency and making sure that works. But it's very communication heavy.
Yes, that was so beautifully said. And I'm honored you're here to talk with me right now, because like, as I'm putting the book together, like sometimes I struggle with like, why is it harder to get a bunch of game developers in a room to create software when it's multidisciplinary to do other things? But what you talk about, theoretically, some people think it's like, I've heard the Steven Spielberg model, like, oh, he's a director and he just tells people what to do. But the way you describe it, right? Like that's not you. Each of these individuals who work at the company have a unique point of view. And if you just tell them what to do, it like cuts off the game's soul that you were discussing.
Yes. And it just doesn't work and people will quit.
It's always so much better than the sum of our parts when you manage. And that's what makes you such a successful narrative designer, is your ability to convey concepts and inspire and like themes and what you were talking about, which in ways that like get other people to take action in the same vein. And so for people who are listening to this and are like, I feel called to narrative design, that sort of abstract communication is so critical to the later parts of your career.
Layer 2. Level up. Studio head. Da1 Entertainment. Loading. Podcast level 7. Career reflections as a studio head.
You mentioned career development and keeping people at studios, and our listeners may be seeing the progression of your career from narrative designer to narrative director to eventually studio head. And I wondered if you could talk about how your time as studio head changed your relationship with video games and game development.
Yeah, so I was the studio head of my own studio. It was called Da1 Entertainment. It ran under the Britannia Media imprint, which for the folks in the know, the Britannia Media did not survive, and we all closed down. But, when you are a studio head and you're in charge of the whole shebang, right? You're doing P&Ls, you're doing market research, you're dealing with legal stuff and personnel and all of those things. My experience was I wanted to stay close to the creativity and to have influence, but I couldn't own it anymore, right? That is a mistake that I've seen a lot of folks who come up from being developers to running studios make, which is they want to keep a hold of the thing that we all love, which is being creative and doing the thing. But if you do that to the detriment of your people and their agency, and you do that to the detriment of your studio because you have your hand in too many pies and there's not enough of your hands to, get a hold of all the pies, then everybody is blocked by you, everybody suffers, and it's just not the way to do it. So I knew that I would be taking a pretty concrete step back from the creative when I was running Darwin. And it was actually a big open question for me. I went in with a question of like, am I going to like this? And to be open to the answer of what I experienced, right? Because I had never run a studio before. I wanted to, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. So I came in with open eyes of being like, we're going to give this a shot. I'm really excited to do this, but let's be honest with ourselves and see how we feel. And I don't know if you're like me, Cheryl, but you can be so ambitious where it doesn't matter what you're feeling. You're just going to do the thing. And I've spent a lot of my career doing that, but I have gotten to a point where I'm advanced enough where it's really about what do I want to do? What is going to sustain me over time? And is this the right spot? And to be brave enough to listen.
Voting. Podcast Level 8. Career progression and motivation.
Thank you for sharing that, because that was such like a transparent and vulnerable share. And I think a lot of people get wrapped up in that. And I don't know if it speaks to us as gamers, right? They're like a lot of gamers, not all gamers, but we're motivated by the pursuit of mastery. And what's bigger mastery than your career? There's always another thing to chase. And it's so easy to get caught up in that. But the fundamental jobs we do change significantly, especially once you start making that change. Director and above, things really pivot. And if you're not prepared for that, that's where you can get into some real struggles. So it's beautiful that you kind of went in with open eyes. You're like, I'm going to try this different thing. And maybe it won't be forever. And then you get the experience too, which is lovely. You have that. I've always found that the people who cross-trained across different disciplines and different levels of leadership, no matter whether they stay, they're always stronger for having that perspective.
For sure. I was very afraid of writing profit and loss statements when I first started running the studio. I was like, this is some magic MBA stuff, and I don't have an MBA. Like, how does this work? And then I sat down with, our business dev guys, and I was like, okay, how do we write this P&L? And they're like, well, you just kind of, since it's early stages and we don't have a lot of data, you just go with your gut. You just, what do you think? And I'm like, excuse me? What? I could have done that 5 years ago. That's the secret, is you just guess. Oh, I was so incensed. I was like, I cannot believe that this is how studios get stood up. There's no math here. There's no secret formula. You guys just guess. And, obviously, as you get deeper into development, your P&L becomes more clear with more supportable data. But there's no magic education that makes you ready to run a studio. You just jump in.
But important and incendiary insight at the same time. I had this same sort of experience when working on the Echo Lift, which was my first new product. It was like, wait, we just make this up? There's not, and it makes sense. Something has to come first. But that was the first time I was like, oh, it's us. We're the people.
Yeah.
Like the Elsa moments in Frozen 2. It's like, I'm the one I've been waiting for the whole time. Oh, I could just do storyboards and make a product?
Really revelatory, I have to say. Yes.
And once you've done that CEO, once you've learned that you can just P&L, then everything else seems a little bit more accomplishable. That's
accessible.
Not a word.
It's accessible.
Accessible, exactly that. It's scary and beautiful at the same time. Like, the other thing that struck me in my career, I don't know if you had the same sort of journey, but I had this thing where I was like, for a while, it's like, I don't want to go into leadership because I know I'm going to have to lose the creative outlets that I've had. Mm-hmm. But then I kept butting up against problems where the problem I wanted to solve was too big for my role, and
yes.
sliding away.
That was very motivating for me too. I'm like, I can't be messed up if I'm the boss. At least it will just be me messing it up.
So in career progression, there are lots of motivators, but it's also, I think your career is a really wonderful demonstration of it's also like a sine wave. Sometimes you take an exploration, sometimes you take a breather, sometimes you go off in a different direction, but it all makes us stronger in the end.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
The term porting in this context is not teleporting, but the act of taking a game or piece of software which was purpose-built for a specific platform like a PC and porting it to a fundamentally different platform like a mobile or gaming console. There's a difference between functionally playable and desirable for many ports. Issues like poor control mapping and bad font rendering can make a port that looks good on paper feel terrible to play.
Loading podcast level 9. Platform informed narrative design.
You've worked on several different platforms. You mentioned a mobile game, and you've worked for VR and console. Like, does your approach to writing change based on the platform at all?
Everything is taken in consideration, right? So, like, if you're making a mobile game, you know that the amount of words you're going to be able to use generally is very few. If you're working on a PC game, you know that you're going to have a little more room. If you're working in VR, reading words is probably going to make people sick. So you go, okay, how can I deliver this narrative without having them read things with the VR eyeball goggles? So yeah, platform does influence, but it's part of a number of things that will influence how the narrative is designed and delivered depending on the game.
Interesting insight, especially because I know some studios think that you can just take a game from a seemingly neutral platform like a PC and just shove it on a phone and it will work. But I think we've all played mobile games where a PC game shoved onto a phone just doesn't quite work. The tiny little fonts just not reading. It takes a lot more thought to make something purpose-built for a platform.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're being honest as career professionals, right, porting is about making money. Mm-hmm. When you port a game, it's because you think you will get access to a new market and new cash flow. And so you want to make that as playable as possible, but you're not going to break the bank to make it perfect for the new platform because it's actually not your primary goal. And it's also just hard, right? Like porting things at a technical level can be extremely hard. And so if it's more work than is worth the effort, right, that's a business balance that studios have to make. They'll either port it well or semi-well, or they won't port it at all, just depending on like, how does that math look? And
I found a lot of studios don't have a lot of respect for the complexities of console in general.
The console, man. I mean, just it is like a big technical puzzle because sometimes the way just those motherboards work is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's the closest to wizardry we actually have. Nobody knows really why some of those graphics cards still work the way they do. But also the we don't need to get into all that. But as like a former producer, the requirements checklists and things. The reason that those experiences are also consistent is the incredible list of things you need to hit before a publisher platform will let you ship. And that can take a long time if people aren't prepared.
Podcast level 10. Scaling narrative design teams.
As a narrative director, have you worked with teams of multiple narrative designers?
Yeah, I have.
You might have answered this a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of people struggle with the transition from solo to group design. So how do you, as a design leader, handle that scaling problem? How do you help a group of narrative designers achieve cohesion creatively and collaboratively?
Well, frankly, I love working in teams. I think it ameliorates a lot of problems that you get when you're working solo. So I like working solo too, and I can do that. But on a team, you have strengths and weaknesses, right? And when you have a team, those strengths are amplified and those weaknesses are covered, right? Someone has more experience in visual storytelling than you, or someone worked in Hollywood and knows blocking really well, right? There's so many aspects to narrative design that require mastery. Like, no matter how good you are, you're not going to master all of them. It's just impossible. And so having a diverse team who covers each other's strengths and weaknesses really well makes me feel so much more comfortable as a narrative director, right? Because I don't have to do everything on my own. I don't have to spot every problem on my own. I am not blind to my own weaknesses because other people are empowered to point them out, right? I think better games get made that way. And so, when I'm working with multiple writers and narrative designers, the first thing we do is just make sure everybody's roles are really clear What are you responsible for? What are you not responsible for? What are our communication expectations? How do we like to communicate with each other? How do we like to handle conflict? If someone says they have no conflict on their team, my red flag goes immediately up, because this is a creative industry. We're going to have conflicts. Those conflicts are healthy if they're conducted in the right way, right? There's also bad ways to handle conflict where whoever yells the loudest in a meeting wins. That's not good. But if you're like, oh, no, we're great, we have no conflicts, it just means someone is not bringing something up that they should.
So true. And creating that safe space where people can bring up the concerns is the difference between a successful game and like a failing game, in my experience, and a number of times where you're like, thank you so much for bringing this up. Thank God you caught it. But it takes time to get a group to that place where they feel like it's okay. I won't be attacked. This isn't this is not a career limiting move by me talking about this particular issue or opportunity. Do you find that there are any particular subspecialties within narrative design when you're working in those larger groups? You mentioned a couple of skills like blocking, but or is it just kind of guided by people's innate skills?
I mean, when you have control of who you hire, right, as a narrative director, you build the team that you want. So, for instance, I'm not that great at writing humorous dialogue. Like, I'm good at other kinds of dialogue, but humor is not my strongest point. So when I was hiring someone to write a lot of dialogue, I would really check, do they have humor chops, right? Can they write humor well? That's going to be important for this role. For my technical narrative designer that I hired, I was like, I need you to actually really understand story. Like, you're not going to be writing, but you need to be really, really in with us on like the vision of this delivery and the feelings that people are supposed to have, so that can guide your narrative system design, right? And there may be other times in other roles where I don't need a technical narrative designer to do that, but because of this particular team, I did, right? And then there's the folks who are like whizzes at narrative branching, right? Which is awesome, because that's like a double bonus, because that's one of my strengths too. And so we can have like super narrative branching, hive mind brain. And so, a lot of this boils down to like, do you know yourself? Are you confident in what you can do? And are you accepting of the things and areas of where you need help? There's this saying that my old CEO taught me, which is A's hire A's and B's hire C's, which basically means like, if you are good and you're like good with yourself, you hire someone equally or more talented than you. But if you have some problems with your self-esteem or your self-assuredness, and maybe you're trying to get better in your role, you're going to hire someone that doesn't threaten you, but that means that they are maybe not the best person you could bring to the role.
So true. And it's so easy to be insecure in an industry that's struggling so much right now. It's asking so much of people to be comfortable enough with themselves and reflective. At the end of the day, especially when we are working, you still need to have enough faith in yourself that it's okay to be working with someone just as good. It's okay to be
or better.
And in fact, the rising tide, like one of the things I keep saying all the time is the rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like a team working at their best, there's always room. Games are expansive. They're infinite worlds. And I've come into a couple of teams, I don't know if you've seen this, where people are kind of like, I don't know, is that person coming for my job? Are we doing the same thing? But there's enough space for both of those people to thrive. It's just about really getting into like what you were describing, helping both of those people understand what their truly unique blueprint is. And once they know that, you get twice as much game. You get twice as much goodness from the team instead of just one, like the equivalent of two people fighting for one person's output.
Yeah. And it's never good when that happens. Like, you got to get in the middle of that and separate them.
And that's why I loved what you talked about, like coming in and defining roles with clarity. I've definitely seen several studios that like struggle with that, and because games are often like, we just got funded, we're running, it's super fast, and that step gets missed. You just keep throwing people in, you don't define roles, but it does affect our ability to work effectively, whether we're in narrative or whether we're in like user experience design. So I loved that you led with that.
Loading. Podcast level 11. The importance of scripting for narrative designers.
What's one thing you would do differently if you had the knowledge and technology that you do now?
What is one thing I would do differently? I mean, I think I would have pushed through on scripting earlier, right? Like, scripting is not my favorite thing. But like, even if you're, quote, just a games writer and you never intend to do any scripting, this is an interdisciplinary field where you talk to lots of people who that is their skill, and you need to understand how their systems work. So whether you intend to ever script or not, just learn it. Just learn it as soon as you can. I would have gone back and learned it earlier.
And you said you were self-taught, so you went to YouTube and other publicly available tools?
Yep, and Udemy and those places where they have the sequential videos. It is easy to self-teach scripting, so you might as well just do it.
Would you say it matters what tool people use if they haven't found a studio yet? Or is it enough to just learn something?
I mean, I would pick either Unreal or Unity. I wouldn't bother with anything like Godot right now. I mean, Godot is an up-and-coming engine, but no big companies have switched to it yet. It's still lacking some features. So either one, Unity or UE5, would be the place to start. Unreal Engine is geared more towards AAAs. It's a very heavy, feature-rich engine. Unity is more geared towards indies. It's like, try making a 2D game with Unreal, you're going to be sad. But if you make it with Unity, it's just a more straight through shot. So it just depends on where you're aiming, but ultimately you want to be familiar with both.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
I know on the surface this may sound impossible because these engines are used for really big video games, but both of them have free access tiers. So for people who are just getting started out, you can access Unity or Unreal and build your own things in it. It benefits those platforms for you to learn because it makes the platform more viable.
Loading. Podcast level 12. Communication that works.
So you've worked on a wide variety of teams and projects. In your opinion, is there anything that the successful teams had in common?
So I know I've been harping this, and I'm going to continue to harp on this for the rest of this interview, but communication that works is the foundation for a team and a studio that works. Because there's going to be different personalities. They're not always going to be best friends or even get along. That's fine if your communication is solid, right? Like, if you know how to disagree, if you know how to conduct conflict appropriately, if you know, okay, it's time to let that go because the game director has put their foot down and you got to accept it and move on, right? And also, good communication helps ameliorate anxiety, misunderstandings, infighting, fighting for hierarchical status. We as humans want to survive. We're very social creatures who want to survive socially. And so if it's not clear to us how to do that, we're going to scramble. We're going to scrapple. And so what clear communication does is say, look, here's all the rules. You know them. I know them. So there's you don't have to be anxious over not understanding what to do. We may not always understand each other. We may talk past each other. We may even fight, but we have the cues to navigate those things successfully. And, no communication is perfect. No communication system within a studio is perfect. But as long as everybody's working on it, and as long as everybody agrees to be, on the same team, communication-wise, then you get a lot farther. And that starts with leadership. It starts at the top. And if you don't have it there, it's going to be a struggle.
And there's the leadership understanding the power dynamic and how they can just absolutely break a game with just a side comment. And then there's the leadership understanding that the team wants systemic structure. And that's been a journey for me in that the whole like move to director level was like, at first I thought, well, I'm supposed to treat folks like adults and they know how to get through things. And I started to realize there's a difference between giving people artistic agency and creating a vacuum in which no one knows how to communicate. And by finally accepting like this level of clarity makes a lot of sense. Like, here are the deliverables. Here's how we do transitions and handoffs and a lot of the things you've talked about, like how to resolve conflicts. I think for some, at least for me, like at first it maybe seemed like basic, like I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence, but no, it's a hard thing to make these games and it takes out that anxiety you were talking about.
And every studio has a specific communication culture. If someone is coming in, you need to be like, here is our communication culture. Because if you don't tell them, they're going to fall in a hole, right? They're going to communicate in a way where everyone else is like, what is that? Or they're going to misunderstand a communication precedent that the studio has. So really the best place to start that conversation is in onboarding, like immediately.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
Near the end of the game development strategy guide, I talk about how it's not so much your perfect game that's the ultimate challenge for game developers, but it's your studio and your culture. And Whitney's point about communication that works is a perfect illustration of that point. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't coordinate a group of 10, 20, 100 people all pointed at those same great ideas, your game isn't going to make any sense. So it's really important to spend time on the people parts, on how we come together as human beings. And not enough studios celebrate the people who are doing that hard work, the people work, the connecting people, celebrating people, the connective tissue. Communication that works is a critical part of the games that thrive.
Loading. Podcast level 13. The problem with venture capital.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the industry today, what would it be?
Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for answering this one. I would remove venture capital from the equation.
That's a good one. Do you want to elaborate on that, or do you just want to mic drop it? Both are fine.
I mean, I could elaborate a little bit. So games are art. Game success is we're a hit-based industry, right? Like movies, where a game can be a hit and no one really knows why, to be honest. Like some games are hits and some are not. And games that are not hits means that the studio has no cash to go forward and do the next thing. And so what VCs expect is a 10x, 10 times return in 5 years. That's their modus operandi, right? And so that doesn't work with the type of thing that we do. It's just on a fundamental level. Like big AAA games, they take 7 years to make, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes game revenue is kind of like a logarithmic incline where you're not going to get 10 times the return in 5 years, but you may get it in 7 or you may get it in 10, especially if it's a live services game. But also, what I've noticed is VCs get real nervous about their money and they will pull out of a game project sometimes in the middle of a game project because they don't understand how games are made and what games look like in the middle of process. They look terrible. They look horrifying. You're like, this is not a game. And it can be that way up to 6 months before release, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's just like, this is not coming together. And so because of how we work and because things really come together in the end before shipping, you'll be a past prototype and it'll be time for your B series funding. And your funder will be like, we don't understand this. This looks terrible. No. And then your game's canceled. And it's just totally unreasonable. And they're not educated in how we make games most of the time. There are game specific VCs that understand much better. But on the whole, a lot of the wreckage we've seen out of the last 2 years has to do with what venture capital is doing to games. 10,000 layoffs in 1 quarter was a result of bad economy, right? And interest rates going up, and then all the VCs freaking out because they're like, oh no, we're not going to make 10 times the return in 5 years. So that means we got to bail. They're just two systems that are fundamentally different, and it causes a lot of damage to developers.
You don't really know risk tolerance until you've tried to ship a game and seen how hot they come in. Like some of the things I saw early in my career at EA, but maybe that was just such a gift where you're like, we're supposed to go to the factory in like a day, and you can't complete the game, and that's EA. That you know, and you're like, that's a game-breaking bug. If we just there's a factory waiting to ship cartridges, and you know, nobody knows that. Like the game ships and it's fine. And we had some very sleepless nights. But it's so hard for people outside the industry to appreciate that it's everything about a movie and everything about a big software project, and you mush them all together, and somehow we make these, and they functionally you can interact with them. We're making worlds. When you deconstruct, like I don't know how we do these.
Every game that gets made is a miracle. Like honestly, like how did that happen? Good job.
and that's the other tough part. You talked about the game soul, and I've definitely been on the other side of games where we had the game soul, and just because of like a weird glitch in marketing or like a VP flips or something, and the game with the game soul does not land the way that you hoped, the way you counted on. And that doesn't make it a bad game. It just means the circumstances didn't work out. There's games that were popular that did not have the soul. They just...
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Huge games that have done extremely well. But as artists, we know, right? When we're working on it, we know.
Yeah, we're not going to call out any names. We just, and hey, if it brings people joy in some way, like obviously people are buying them for a reason, right? But there are some really beautiful works of art out there that just didn't hit the right timing. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it is something really important. And I hope we can get to a more stable funding model at some point.
Me too. I mean, obviously there's several factors that go into this. Consolidation is another big issue. Consolidation of studios under, big brand tents is also not good for developers. And just in general, like, the only way to have full control of yourself as a studio now is to have personal capital, right? And it was always that way. Like during the .com boom, a lot of people got personal capital and went and started making games. That's actually how a lot of our first really well-known studios started. But the cost of making games is so high now that the personal capital route is very unusual and usually not accessible to people starting their own studios, and they have to turn to VC funding. Like there isn't a choice. And so what are you going to do?
We're caught in this loop where the industry assumes that things that aren't of a certain size are flops, but those certain things require like hundreds of hours of gameplay, which require an entire city to make. In the end, you've talked about so many amazing tools for making games. And if the industry just shifted its expectations for success and boosted smaller games, boosted things that did not take an entire city, we'd actually find it to be a very thriving community. But the oxygen has all been consumed by looking at these live service games or these big...
being profit driven. Yeah.
And we don't have time to unpack the chase of the live service games, although having worked on a few now, I start to understand why it's driven the numbers people so mad. Yeah, I know there's lots of indie energy coming out of these layoffs out of just necessity. I don't love that that's why we're in this place, but I hope from that forest fire comes new flowers.
That's my hope too.
Podcast level 14. Sustaining narrative career dreams in tough conditions.
Here's a spicy one. Is there anything you think people should know who are trying to start their careers right now in these tough times?
So if you are like a student who's graduating and you're thinking, I want to get into games, maybe do something else for a year or two. And I unfortunately, I'm being serious. Yeah, you're competing with mid and senior level folks for any and every job. It's kind of like 2008 during the financial crisis where there just were no jobs. It's that way, but just for the games industry right now. And so if you can do something adjacent, or if you can work on your portfolio personally while you get that tech money, whatever it is, now is a good time to let it have a cool off. If you are insistent and you want to start right now, great. Then that's, what you're up against, eyes open. I will say this is not a career where if you prioritize financial stability, like that's the most important thing to you, this is not the right place, right? And like not everybody gets to choose that, right? That's a point of privilege. Like not everybody has access to support, right? And so if you need to take care of yourself and you're doing that on your own, games is hard. Games will take from you, right? Like maybe you won't have insurance sometimes. Maybe you won't have enough to make your rent. And other times you'll be set and you'll be like, I love games. And, I don't want to do anything else. And I'm making this great tech salary. It comes with real highs and real lows. And honestly, not everybody is aligned to that. And not everybody has to be. But if you can't take it in stride, well, there's a reason why the average game tenure is 5 years, right? People get sick of it and they leave. So I'm not leaving, most of all because you'd have to like drag me kicking and screaming. I really, really love doing this. But also, I just got lucky and I have support systems that work for me.
You talked about adjacent industries, and there are certainly other industries where someone who's skilled in crafting narrative or crafting content is valuable. Design is a subset of the user experience craft family in technology, so that might be one place to go. And if you're also project-minded or a leader, look into project management, because your writing skills are what help you rally a group of people around a shared idea. You don't need to be a narrative designer to provide value with your storytelling skills.
You also mentioned that you really appreciated the opportunity to do tabletop game design, and that actually is not a gated game design exercise. Anybody can
Not at all.
Can do that. So if people are looking to do that on the side while they keep their day job and wait for the garbage fire to settle, there are still ways to chase the narrative design passion without breaking the bank.
For sure. And, do a Twine game, right? Twine games are great for your portfolio. I see them in every portfolio as a hiring manager. There's something in there that's a Twine project. They're really good at communicating your narrative skills, particularly in dialogue and branching, but also in pacing and story structure and characterization too. So I would always suggest, if you have time and you want to do something that adds to your portfolio, make a Twine game.
Twine games, what a great suggestion for folks. Thank you.
Loading. Final podcast level. Links and follow-up.
So, how can our listeners keep up with your work after the podcast?
Oh, goodness. So I have a website. It's brightwhitney.com, because my name is Whitney and I'm bright and shining. And I also made the move to Blue Sky, where I am, again, Bright Whitney. So those are the two places to catch me. On a professional level, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always doing side projects on top of regular work anyway. So sounds like you want to work with me, let me know.
Find socials and other links on the episode 5 show notes at enduringplay.com.
But thank you so much for your time today, Whitney. It has been a pleasure and an honor to get to sit down with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. It's really good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's chat, don't forget to see how Whitney's insights were shared in context in the Game Development Strategy Guide, my new book from Rosenfeld Media. It's now available for pre-order from rosenfeldmedia.com or your favorite online bookseller. Whitney is featured alongside 14 other industry experts in a guide that will help people of all experience levels and disciplines level up their game development expertise. And as of this episode, Enduring Play is available at your favorite online bookseller or at rosenfeldmedia.com. Enduring Play listeners can get 15% off at rosenfeldmedia.com through November 30th using the code EnduringPlayS1. Join me next time for another conversation with one of the experts featured in my book as we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive.
Initiating final credits sequence. Podcast. Enduring Play. Created and produced by Cheryl Platts. Copyright Idea Platts, LLC. All rights reserved. Podcast theme composed by Cheryl Platts. To learn more about Cheryl's books, visit rosenfeldmedia.com. For book and podcast merch, go to ideaplatts.dashery.com. Follow Cheryl on Blue Sky at Funny Godmother. Explore the podcast at enduringplay.com. To learn more about Idea Platts, the design education consultancy, visit ideaplatts.com.